Welcome, Nathan here from Overtime Fraud, Senior Consultant, Protection and Integrity. And I'm joined today by our founder and director, Adrian. Adrian, welcome along.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Nathan. It's great to be here.
Fantastic. Now, at Overtime Fraud, we're interested in helping businesses fraud-proof their organizations against fraudsters. And so today we thought we'd jump in and talk about the four key types of business fraud. So time theft, credit card theft, misusing company resources, and of course the big one that we love to talk about, overtime fraud. Now I'm going to ask Adrian, we're going to walk through four questions around each of those, and
Hmm.
I won't state them all now. You don't need to remember them. We'll do it one by one. So let's start with time theft. What is it?
Yeah. Time theft is, I think it's the most pervasive fraud that staff commit against their business, against the organization.
Mm,
Yeah, it's very simple. Like it could be as simple as having a longer lunch and not claiming it. That is like the classic example. The other one, I think the more modern version is um, watching movies on working from home. Uh, that's
yes, yeah.
yeah. So
I've
like it's
heard of
very
that happening, and I've even been in workplaces where I've been aware of it happening in work, in the office, at the desk.
yeah. In some organizations really struggle with like what to do, and so sometimes just organizations just think it's just easier to ignore than it is to actually pretend this is happening,
Mm.
which is kind of crazy. But yeah, so it is like the most pervasive one, I think.
And
Yeah.
this is going to sound pretty simple, but our second question that I want to walk through in each of these types of
Hmm.
fraud is, what does the employee get out of it?
Yeah, this is the one where it has the least to gain, I think. Well, maybe not the least to gain, but like the gains are so small often. I
Mm,
mean, look, if you're like not turning up to work at all and working a second business and getting paid for both, that's a type of like extreme version. But most of it's like small bits. So the employee, I mean, gains a little bit of time, but it's not like it is endemic. So it is like a death by a thousand cuts, perhaps, rather than
yeah, but we're
just
not
like
talking cheap stations here.
no. Although you wonder if it was a business that had 10,000 staff over a year, that may be a whole project that could have been funded by existing resources and
Yeah.
completed.
And when you put it that way, you're talking about potential profits that can add up very quickly.
Yeah, so yeah.
Mm,
So it's certainly
so
significant, but it's not, I don't think it's like there's one moment where you can stop it. It's more like a cultural issue. Yeah,
mm,
that kind of stuff.
And do you think that you've already mentioned that it's taking work time away from organizations where there could be another project which has a monetary impact on the business? The third question is how does it harm a business? Are there any other factors or other ways that you think it would harm a business?
Well, look, there's some yeah, there's some really difficult bits, particularly with staff being paid by work unit. So let's say if you're picking, like I had a job back in the day, picking strawberries, my first job before university, and you're paid by the amount of strawberries you pick. So in one sense,
Mm,
you couldn't that business couldn't suffer time theft because they had made it that you just get paid by whatever strawberries you pick. So there are some
yeah,
ways
yeah.
around it, but particularly and I suppose the other end of the scale, you think about like the staff member who's responsible for a project. Like this whole
Mhm.
body of work is actually the thing they're responsible for. So to some degree, as long as that's delivered, um, yeah. as long as that's delivered, you always wonder how much better it could be delivered or what other kinds of things. But you
Mm,
also have some insulation there. But it's the
yeah.
job where the person doesn't have deliverables or doesn't have like a global deliverable, just like as part of a team. I think that is the worst bit because it's hard for business to insulate them from that kind of
Mm,
yeah, that waste, where it's not an obvious thing. They can say, well, you were meant to have done this, like your work's like kind of taken up in terms of a bigger project. It's hard to figure out what this person did and what that person did. Yeah, I think that's where it really hurts businesses, I think.
yeah. So, I mean, the fourth question is there something about it that's limiting? So obviously you've spoken about businesses where it's an outcomes-based payment
Mm.
system. So that's a natural limit that exists in those. Do you think in a different scenario, perhaps a government scenario or a corporate situation where you're being paid for your time rather than your output, is there still a natural limit on this?
Yeah, there is, which is so there's a very obvious limiting behavior, and that's that you need to do enough to keep your job. So like your performance itself has to be perceived to be up to scratch. So that's, I think, the limiting favor, the limiting aspect to it is that
Yeah.
if you steal too much time, your boss is going to think you're just doing a crap job. Whereas the reality is you're actually stealing time. You're probably maybe even good at your job.
Mm,
And that's, I mean, the hard bit is then for some businesses that don't reward their staff, and a really good team member thinks, well, actually, I can do the same as my colleague, and I need to work 3.5 days a week to do that. So
yeah.
sometimes it goes the bigger question is how are you rewarding and incentivizing your staff, and how are you managing performance? Because I think if you do those two things right, you offer like
Mm,
incentives for the you best performer to like stay at the game, and you're managing performance generally, like that's the limiting factor to it. So if you doesn't do either of those, I think you are probably in a significant strife for the amount
mm.
of time theft you could be suffering.
So if you're a business leader, if you're a manager in a business of a team or a large group of people, whatever that might be, those are the questions to really think through around time theft and how it's operating in your organization. Let's move on to number two, credit card theft. What is it? What do employees get from it?
Yeah, the obvious, well, it's defined by who in your organization has access to a credit card or is responsible for a credit card. So that's the first thing to limit, the way to limit this one is to figure out who's got it, because you can only do it if you've got access to it. So
Mm,
yeah, and it's making using that credit card to make purchases that aren't connected to to your job or to the performance of the business or that kind of thing.
and how damaging do you think this is? Because you've worked in government, I've worked in government, and you and I both know that there are checks and procedures in place in government. That's true of the corporate world as well. It-
Mhm.
How bad can it actually get given that's in place?
Pretty bad. I think there have been some recent examples of people stealing executives, stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars through credit card illegitimate credit card purchases. Because it comes down to the decision of what is a legitimate business expense and what isn't. So I
Mm,
remember looking at something when I was internal affairs of, yeah, in a business, they were offering all the executives once a month cigarette and whiskey night. And they'd all turn up, and then the boss would pay for it all on his credit card. And there was some decision, some question around that. Was that actually a legitimate business expense? And you can go, like, you can completely go either way on it. I think you could say this is horrendous. Why are you doing this? Or you actually just view it as actually like a team bonding thing that everyone in that team actually likes, and so you've actually got a good alignment between an incentive and something the business is providing. But it's exactly that kind of situation. What is its connection to the business? So yeah,
yes.
so it's in one sense everything's on a continuum between absolutely essential for the business, like your business can't run, um, versus all the way down to if you didn't have this expense, like the business would be completely unaffected.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. And so I think we covered question three there, which is what's the damage to the business. Number
Mm.
four is and I think we covered a little bit of this maybe, but natural limitations.
Yeah, so the main limitation is you can't, is it has to look like a regular business expense. So, I mean, look, there's a rare example of buying cigars or whiskey or something, but generally, if a person turned up and their boss was checking their credit card expenses and saw like a whiskey purchase or a cigar purchase, I'd like, what on earth straight away.
Yeah.
And the other thing you can't get at with a credit card is cash, or you can't pay your mortgage, you can't pay gambling debts with it. So if you think about why would someone want to steal from an organization, a credit card offers quite a good array of protection because they could only buy like secondary stuff. They can't even go to Coles and buy food, right?
Mhm.
They might be able to go and buy petrol because that makes, oh, I had to fill up the company car, but actually that was your private car, something like that. So there's is actually, if you think about the overlap between what a business buys and what someone who's intent on stealing money for like some desperate personal financial situation, the credit, there's only like a, it's not everything. Everything that person
Mm,
wants,
mm.
most of it's not in the middle of that Venn diagram. So it offers like reasonable protection as long as there's some kind of overview, someone else is looking at it.
Mm.
Yeah, generally that is sufficient to solve like the 80% of the worst excesses of it. Like someone may pay for their parking by accident because they just have the corporate credit card there and they just pay for the wrong
Yes,
card. But
that's right. That's
actually,
right.
that's not the huge risk isn't that kind of stuff. It's actually like yeah, big purchases which are dressed up to look like a proper business expense. But yeah, from a fraudster's perspective, it's not ideal because it's pretty hard to get the stuff that they want onto that
So
credit card purchase.
this is where I'm interested in getting to number four, which is what we're all about as an organization, which is overtime fraud, because that has the capacity to be ridiculously lucrative. And the fraudster could basically do whatever they want with it. But we've got number
Yep,
three to
yep.
go through first, which is misusing company resources. What is it? What does the employee get out of it?
Yeah, it's pretty hard. So you think about what resources a business has access to. And for most businesses, okay, like us, we everyone's got some IT. Um, yeah, got a whole bunch of IT. That's about it. I mean, but if you were a civil contractor, you run a you drive a backhoe or a digger or something like those really big pieces of machinery. You could say you could, and you had access to it because, like, let's say you turn up to work at 5 o'clock in the morning, drive in, you put the digger on the back of the truck, and you drive the truck out to the site, and then you do the thing at the
Mm,
site with the digger, put it back on the truck and drive it back to the lot. Well, for that to happen, you've got access to the lot and access to the keys, and you're just like a trusted employee. Like no one's there letting you in, you can let yourself in and do it. Well, then if you bought a property. This happens. Bought a property like 20 k's out of town, and you're like, well, I don't need to hire a subcontractor to level to put the pad down. I can, and they
got
go in
that
there
covered.
got that covered, and then they go just illicitly, just quietly, just drive in on a Saturday morning because no one's working on Saturday or Sunday morning. Drive back to the property, level your pad, do all the things you're going to do, and drive it back, and then return it like nothing's happened.
Mm,
So that's like a that's and that look that may not be illegitimate if it was requested formally and approved. It's that like that illicit activity of not getting
right.
any approval and using the facilities for ways which the business didn't anticipate. Because the business may say, well, that thing only has like 10,000 hours of operating
Exactly.
life, and you've just used over the last 6 weeks every Sunday, you've used up, I don't know, 200 hours of its operating life. So,
You've also got
so
the complex thing, I suppose, of the liability. If something goes wrong to it
exactly.
in transit and it's not covered by insurance because that was not a work thing that you were using it for, that could
Yeah.
end up being quite expensive for a company.
Yeah, or someone gets injured on the piece of
Mhm.
machinery, or
Exactly.
exactly. Yeah, it's so it yeah, it's very interesting. But I suppose that you said, I think what's in the are we up to limiting factors of it, or is there something else?
We are limiting factors.
Yeah,
That's right.
is the overlap between what your business does and what you need. So,
Yes,
you know, I don't work at a business where I have access to large machinery, and nor do I actually have need for it. So that use case, although like that person, let's say in that example, may have saved themselves like $50,000. That's quite a huge amount of money if they had to pay, pay themselves to go
absolutely.
do it.
Yeah.
But like the amount of use that someone would have for it is actually quite low. And most
Mm,
businesses, well, it depends on most businesses don't have that much stuff that a staff member to go, oh, I just really need to use this on the weekend. But if that is your business, and this is actually quite like, so if you are a civil works contractor, that's quite an issue of like people borrowing improperly borrowing like the dingo diggers and yeah, all kinds of stuff.
that's
Yes,
right.
so I don't think it's like, yeah, for certain businesses, this is a real problem.
And look, I want to move on to our fourth one here, overtime fraud. This is the juicy one, I think, the one that goes under the radar. It's hard to detect and it can be ridiculously lucrative for the fraudster. What is
Yeah.
it? What does the employee get out of it?
Well, what it is simply claiming overtime that you aren't entitled to and haven't worked. So I
Mm,
think the two bits of it aren't entitled to. So I think it even includes intentionally working slow so you can gain overtime. Because what overtime is it's using your payroll system to incentivize your workers. And if you think someone's worked like their regular 40 hours a week, to buy another 10 hours of labor from that person, and the industrial system set up for this is like, well, if you want to buy the another 10 hours, you have to pay a premium. And that premium can be 1.5, 2.5, 3. I've even been paid it in one job, 3x on my wages when I worked a couple of days of
wow,
overtime. Yeah, which is as soon as you realize that, you're like, that's
that's
extremely
huge.
lucrative.
Has the
Yeah.
potential to be an absolute gold mine.
Oh, I think unfortunately that's exactly the right phrase because
Mm,
it's pure cash. Like you are being paid through the payroll system. It's not like the person has to come in and figure out they have a use case that the work machinery is going to help them out or a credit card and they're like, oh, well, how can I make this look like a work expense? Once it's signed off, it's just pure cash in your bank account. And that cash can go for anything. If you have a gambling
that's
debt,
right.
that can pay your gambling debt. If you're like your mortgage is crippling you and you worry about the bank, can sort that out. Yeah, it's cash. So it's extremely liquid, is the most liquid asset that you can get hold of.
Yeah, which makes it one of the most dangerous when we're talking about the different types of frauds to any given organization. So, uh, how does it hurt the organization? I mean, obviously, there's the money drain to the bottom line. Um,
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, it's really can be really insidious because it's turbocharged. So you're paying like up to three or beyond 3x of their time that doesn't exist.
Mm,
So you could be paying days of wages for something, and that product doesn't exist. Like the actual thing that you bought, that product, that time is like vacuous. Yeah, so I suppose the worst bit, not the worst bit, but the really insidious bit of it is that employers sign it off or managers sign it off.
yes.
And I was thinking about it earlier this week for one of our clients. The problem with overtime is if a team's using it, which means they're under the pump, which actually means that managers are even more likely. So that most managers are extremely busy as it is with operations and all the things that are coming across their desk. Then you've got a busy period on top of it. So like the actual level of assessment of that claim is actually going to be very low or very likely to be very low. So that the worst
Mm.
bit is it comes through the business, and the business thinks this is a necessary, urgent, important, and legitimate expense. So there's no reason to question it because it's not coming like a credit card. You're like, actually,
Yes.
did Jeff actually need all these 10 things he's paid for? The audit team and the payroll team say, oh, we just had to spend $1 million in the last couple of weeks on overtime. Well, seems legit.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing here is how widespread it is. So, I mean, I've you can do a Google of this. If you don't mind, Adrian, I just want to read some of the publicly listed frauds, which anyone can find on Google for overtime fraud. So there was one in Australia in 2024 with ambulance. Victoria Payroll Department. We had 6 employees, and we are talking $2.3 million in fraud,
Amazing. Yeah,
overtime
I mean,
fraud.
the Googling is such a yeah, it's such a thing because I think
Yeah,
I went through like 4 pages of Google results till I found like a repeated item from up the top. And then there's just so many um unique bits. And think about what it takes to get onto Google anyway. Like it has to have happened, it be found, a business is willing or someone's willing to talk about it or it comes up in court, and then the
mm,
media reports on it. So there's like 4 points of there's a whole bunch of stuff that
absolutely.
isn't caught. The business never told anyone about it. It happened, or the media never reported on it. So these are only the ones that made it through all those like 4 filters to finally get up on Google. And even then, you're like, it's horrendous. Like
Yeah,
properly horrendous. And
that's right. Now,
it's not small amounts. Like most of them, and this is a terrifying thing. People steal more than $100,000 in a hit, like over a 12
that's
month
right.
period. It's
Yeah.
oh, and we can see, and then look, the last bit is is incredible because if you think about is that staff member? So let's say staff move in and out of organizations and change organizations, but if you're stealing $100,000 a year, what is your likelihood of you leaving that organization? Like very low. You have to be
That's
forced
right.
out because you've
You
got
are
this huge
onto a good
subsidy.
thing. You want to roll with that.
Yeah, it's really when you think about it, there's almost no reason for that person to want to leave. And because it
Mm,
comes, all those applications come bundled up and as approved that yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And the thing is, managers are doing their job, but they're under the pump and they rightly trust their employees. And we're, 95, 96, 97% of employees, they are low risk. They are doing the right thing. It's those few bad eggs that are really putting it to the test and putting the organization at risk. Um, Now, at Overtime Fraud, we've developed something that is designed to help organizations catch out fraud that other systems can't see.
Mhm.
It uncovers those hidden patterns, and we're here to reach out to you to help educate you on the different types of overtime fraud that there are and to work with you to help fraud proof your organization. So, Adrian, if someone wants to reach out and get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, the easy way is overtimefraud.com, and there's a little button at the top which is like uh, book free consultation, and that gives you access to my calendar and just book a time in. And then that's it. We don't charge you anything. We're completely transparent about what we need and all of that stuff. But yeah, we're very happy to help. I think the worst bit for some of our clients is they just feel stuck because
Yeah.
they don't know how to. They like spending huge amounts of money on overtime and suspect there's something wrong. But there's
Mm,
actually no way of figuring it out. And we just want to help businesses, if you're at that
yeah,
point, actually come up with a solution. So we're on your
absolutely.
side. Yeah, just willing to offer some of our expertise to help you out.
Well, thank you, Adrian. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan.
And we'd love to hear from you if you're out there watching this. Take care.
See you later.
Thank you.